All right, I have that it's 12:15, everybody. Hello and welcome. My name is Chelsea Byers and I am a family life educator with University of Illinois Extension. And I am happy to welcome you all to our fourth session of the Nutrition, Wellness, and the Brain series. This may be one of multiple sessions you've joined or it may be your first. And our topic today is nutrition and wellness into adulthood. This series is a collaboration between Illinois Extension and the Interdisciplinary Health Sciences Institute at University of Illinois, and it's designed to connect those across the state with researchers at our university and provide evidence-based educational programming. If you're new to Zoom, there is a chat box. If you have any questions during our program, please just type your questions in the chat box. If Corinne doesn't see it, I'm just going to bring her attention to it. If you are calling in from a phone, if you could please hold your questions until the end of the session, we'd appreciate it. Also, due to the high numbers that are on our call, we do ask that everybody keeps their videos off and we ask you to stay muted. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for our series. Her name is Corinne Cannavale. Corinne received her Bachelor's of Science in Molecular and Cell Biology with a minor in Chemistry from University of Illinois in 2017. She is currently a PhD student in the Body Composition and Nutritional Neuroscience Lab, where her primary research investigates how memory can be enhanced through diet and exercise. And again, today, her topic is nutrition and wellness into adulthood. All right, take it away, Corinne.
All right, thank you, Chelsea. So as we mentioned, we're going to be talking about nutrition and wellness in adulthood. I'm going to quickly go over just some overarching themes that we're going to talk about today. And so first, I wanted to briefly go over randomized control trials again, because I'm going to be referencing a few randomized control trials throughout the session today. And so randomized control trials are kind of one of the top tier methods for assessing nutrition and wellness research, especially in relation to cognition and metabolism. And so with a randomized control trial, we can kind of get a better idea if there's a causational relationship that's occurring. And we can do this by having a group of individuals that gets randomized into multiple testing groups, and these testing groups can be a diet. Oops, sorry, my dog is barking at me. A dietary intervention or a fitness intervention or any kind of supplementation. And usually we also have a control group so that we can see for people who don't get that intervention or treatment, if there is any kind of effect that's going on just based on any kind of other environmental factors that we can't control for. And so now just looking ahead at nutrition, I'm going to talk about 4 different components of our diet that can impact cognitive functioning. So I'll first talk about carotenoids as well as flavonoids and DHA. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about breakfast consumption and how we think that relates to cognitive functioning. So carotenoids, as you guys have heard me talk about if you've been at some previous sessions, these are plant pigments and our bodies can't produce them on our own. So a really good example of this is the flamingo. Flamingos are naturally this kind of gray-white color at birth. And because of their high consumption of shrimp, which have high levels of beta carotene, they will then produce this pink color on their feathers because of their diet. So they can't produce these carotenoids on their own, but because of their diet, they are expressing them then in their pigmentation. Some of the carotenoids that you can consume will help our bodies create vitamin A, and others won't go on to create vitamin A, but they will have antioxidant properties in the body. And specifically, they protect against photooxidative damage in the eyes. And so because of their activity in the eyes, there have been studies to quantify carotenoids in the brain. And so this is a chart taken from a study where they assessed carotenoids in infants who had passed away from mostly SIDS. And you can see that we get this deposition of a variety of carotenoids in the brain with this really high level of lutein, which is one of the main carotenoids that we study in neural tissue. And so just because I got a few questions about this the last time I talked about carotenoids, I wanted to talk a little bit about macular pigmentation and carotenoids in the eye. So lutein, the carotenoid that I mentioned earlier, as well as zeaxanthin, which is just another formation of lutein, deposit in the macula of the eye. So this is kind of the portion of the eye that's directly behind the pupil. And this helps protect against photooxidative damage. So you can see in this chart on the right, I kind of have a scaled diagram of the level of macular pigmentation you can have. So we set that on a scale from 0 to 1, and how that relates to the amount of harmful blue light that can affect your photoreceptors. So basically, if you have this harmful blue light coming from UV radiation, or blue light coming from like computer screens and cell phones, that can cause oxidative damage to your cells. And so the carotenoids that are in the macula of your eye are going to protect against that. And we see a really great representation of that in age-related macular degeneration, where if you have higher levels of macular pigmentation, you'll actually prevent this degeneration that occurs over time with age, and prevent some vision loss that is associated with that. And in the lab, we can use this device here. It's called a macular densitometer to assess the macular pigmentation in the eye. And so basically you look into the scope and you see a blue disc and it flickers, and when it stops flickering, we have you stop it, or just let us know that it's stopped. And using a ratio of the frequency at which you see the disc stop flickering, we can assess your macular pigmentation. So everybody sees that disc stop flickering at a certain time, depending on how much macular pigmentation they have, and then that's how we can get this score from 0 to 1. And so there have been a few intervention studies that have been done assessing lutein and zeaxanthin. This is specifically in adults aged 18 to 30, where they completed 1 year of supplementation. They either got a placebo pill that did not have any lutein and zeaxanthin in it, or they got a supplement which contained 10 milligrams of lutein and 2 milligrams of zeaxanthin every day for a year. And so you can see here in the center graph, I first just plotted the improvement in spatial memory that they saw. So they saw an improvement for the intervention group in spatial memory. There was still an improvement in the placebo group. So there is some sort of learning effect with this. However, there was a statistically significant difference between these two groups, showing a significant improvement. They then looked at participants who showed a change in macular pigment. So, and sorry, I just realized that these are labeled incorrectly for the one on the left. But basically they looked at participants who went through the intervention and then saw an improvement in their macular pigment. And so we can assume that that means that they have higher levels of, or they saw an increase of lutein and zeaxanthin in other neural tissues beyond the macula. And so here, like I mentioned, this is mislabeled. So people who had an increase in macular pigment had an improvement in reasoning ability, as well as complex attention on the right. So there was some improvement there, and they can link that to the supplementation, because it was only in the group that had an improvement in MPOD that was getting this supplement. However, this is a supplement intervention, and so as I've mentioned earlier in the series, sometimes whole foods are better to consume rather than a supplement, because they're packaged with nutrients that allow you to better absorb these nutrients. So in the avocado, for example, there are a variety of nutrients available, and a lot of these are able to be taken up by the body easier because of the presence of mono and polyunsaturated fats. So these are healthy fats. They're really great for your health, and they also support the absorption for a lot of the nutrients available in the avocado, such as lutein, choline, and things like vitamin E and K. Avocados are also really plentiful in things like fiber, and so those are also going to help with bioavailability. But these three examples are really great when we're looking at the avocado because they're all lipid soluble, meaning that they're going to be better absorbed in the presence of a fat. And so because of this high bioavailability and the idea that food is really going to be beneficial for our ability to uptake these nutrients, our lab actually did an intervention study where we assessed the effectiveness of the avocado on cognitive function. So we had 84 adults between 24 and 45 years old came into the lab, and they completed a randomized control trial for 12 weeks. And they got one meal a day that they were usually consuming for lunch, and it either contained an avocado or a nutrient balanced meal that had all of the same levels of nutrients that weren't of interest to us. However, it didn't have the avocado, so it differed in fiber amounts as well as lutein and zeaxanthin. And so you can see here that our participants had an improvement in the amount of lutein that was in their serum. So they had a blood draw before and after the intervention. And they also showed improvement in this attentional control task. So what's specifically interesting is this one labeled incongruent accuracy. So this is for the more difficult trial type because you have to ignore stimuli that are more disruptive for your ability to focus on this central arrow here. And you can see here that they have a significant improvement, whereas the people that were in the control group did not have improvement on this task. And so here we can kind of see that the avocados are improving the participants' ability to apply the selective attentional ability needed for this task. So now I'm going to kind of shift gears to flavonoids and talk a little about what these are and some of the research that is behind these. So flavonoids are really popular in the media. They're present in fruits and vegetables as well as tea and dark chocolate. And I forgot to mention, if you guys got the handout has some examples of foods that contain all of the nutrients that I'm going to talk about today. They also have antioxidant properties similar to the carotenoids, and they can also impact some cell signaling pathways depending on the flavonoid that we're talking about. And so these have been studied a lot in relation to metabolic and cardiovascular disease, and they're more so studied in the idea of high fruit and high vegetable diets. Flavonoids are present in red wine, and so this is kind of where the media gets its traction to want to talk about them. So a few years ago, this was a really popular article that was circulating, basically saying that a glass of red wine was the same as going to the gym for an hour every day. And this had to do with the cardiovascular benefits of certain flavonoids. So again, drinking wine is not as good as going to the gym. However, you will get some benefits from the antioxidants that are present in foods containing flavonoids, and that's where this idea has kind of come from. And so for this evidence, instead of doing a randomized control trial, I found what's known as a meta-analysis. And so basically, somebody will go through the literature, review what is available to them from things like randomized control trials, and then combine all of that data together and look at it as a whole. And so this can be a really great way to assess whether there's an effect there, because we can create a larger sample size when we combine all of these studies together. And so these studies have basically found that there are some benefits for cognitive functioning with flavonoids. So some studies have shown improvement in working memories, and other studies have actually found that flavonoids might protect against cognitive decline. So people who were consuming high flavonoid diets throughout the lifespan had protection against cognitive decline, more so than individuals who were not consuming high levels of flavonoids. And so there is some evidence that these can affect cognitive functioning. However, just be wary of what you're seeing in the media, especially because there's a lot of hype that goes into these. And so again, it's important to evaluate what we're reading in the media today. And then the last nutrient I wanted to discuss was DHA, and I've talked about DHA a few times as well. It's really popular in the nutrition and brain science realm. DHA is an omega-3 fatty acid, and it's found in foods like fish, nuts, avocado, and some oils. DHA is a building block for cell membranes, and it's also a building block for the insulation of neurons for the brain. And so if they're better insulated, you're going to be able to have faster processing speeds down a neuron. And this can lead to better cognitive functioning in things like memory and attention. And so here I just included some data from a functional MRI or a functional imaging study, where basically we have participants complete a task while they're in an MRI scanner. And we can see how certain regions of the brain are activated and whether we see higher levels of activation in different intervention groups. So for this study, they had 13 adults come through their lab. They had them complete a randomized control trial where they consumed a supplement for 1 month, and the supplement was either a placebo, or sorry, this was a diet. So they either had a placebo normal diet, or they consumed a DHA rich or an EPA rich. So EPA is just another form of omega-3 fatty acid. And so here they had them complete what's known as the Stroop task in the scanner. So this is a really popular task just on social media today. So I included a picture of it in the top corner. So this is basically they're seeing a series of color words, and they're colored in a different color or in the same color as what the word actually says. So you can see they're then being required to read the word and ignore the color. So red, green, blue, yellow, and then vice versa, where they're asked to give the name of the color of the word. So this would be green, yellow, white, pink. And so you can imagine that that's pretty hard. It seems easy at first, but as you go on for a while, your brain kind of gets tripped up and mixed up by the different signals that are coming in, both in word and color. And so you can see here that the participants that consumed a DHA-rich diet performed significantly better than the EPA-rich diet, as well as the controls. And especially on the more difficult trials where the color and the word are different from one another. So again, they saw changes in performance as well as activity. And so that's the graphs that I've actually included here. So you can see that they're having higher levels of neural activation in relation to the DHA-rich diet. And so this is kind of leading to the idea that there might be better processing speed going on and better processing or activation of the brain in relation to this diet. Sorry, my dog is jumping on my computer. Okay, sorry about that. And so then the last thing that I wanted to talk about was exercise. And so as I've talked about in the past, the last thing I wanted to talk about was breakfast. Sorry, I'm a little turned around with my slides. And so breakfast, like I talked about with childhood nutrition 4 weeks ago, there is a thought that breakfast might be beneficial for cognitive functioning, specifically in the realm of attention. And so this is thought to be related to glucose regulation and the metabolism that goes on in our body in relation to glucose and insulin. So here I've included just some data from a study where they looked at how blood glucose changes throughout the day are affected by breakfast versus skipping breakfast. So you can see the blue line is for participants who had breakfast, and kind of these peaks right here are going to be right after the consumption of each meal. And so you can see for the participants who skipped breakfast, they're having much higher peaks, specifically at this middle of the day period, right after they consume their food. And so it's thought that these more high peaks and more variability in blood glucose can impact the brain. And so I also included, or I read through a review of the literature basically where they looked at breakfast, and this is kind of the driving hypothesis for how they think it can affect cognition. And this review also found that multiple studies have seen improvements in memory and attention with consumption of breakfast during the day or in the morning. So there is some evidence that suggests that we shouldn't be skipping that meal and consuming breakfast in order to keep our blood glucose level and also affect cognitive functioning. So now we'll switch gears to exercise and looking at how exercise can impact the brain. So I first just wanted to include some recommendations from the World Health Organization on exercise and adulthood. So they're recommending that adults are engaging in physical activity every week, and this can include moderate exercising like walking or gardening or chores, and also more vigorous exercises like dancing, running, and biking. And so the recommendations are that you should engage with 150 minutes of moderate or 75 minutes of vigorous exercise every week. These should be performed in bouts greater than 10 minutes, so you shouldn't only be running for 5 minutes. And muscle strength and exercise should be done about 2 days per week. And so when we're looking at the brain in relation to exercise, there's a driving hypothesis basically that exercise can improve how our brain organizes and creates new neurons. And that can in turn affect cognitive functioning. And so one of the areas of study that's really looked into in relation to exercise is memory, because the brain region that is responsible for our memory is very modular, and so exercise can affect how it's reorganizing its neurons throughout the lifespan. And so this study here was really cool, done at the University of Illinois, where we can actually image the brain while vibrating the head and see how structurally stable brain regions are. And so for this study, we looked specifically at the hippocampus, which is the main brain region that we like to study when we're thinking about memory performance. And so you can see here that they see a really strong relationship with this relationship of damping ratio or structural stability in the hippocampus and aerobic fitness. So you can see on the green graphs here, we see a positive relationship with aerobic fitness levels in relation to the structural stability of the hippocampus, but we don't see that relationship with volume. So there's something going on with the organization of the neurons rather than just the size of the brain region that exercise can affect. We also see that same relationship with memory performance and the structural stability of the hippocampus. And when we put this into a statistical model altogether, we can actually see that aerobic fitness is mediating that relationship. So there's something going on with exercise and our body's ability to be aerobically fit that is affecting the structural stability of the hippocampus and in turn memory performance. And so now I wanted to talk briefly about sleep, since we've gotten a few questions in our feedback surveys regarding sleep and how sleep can impact our brain. So sleep is, as I'm sure everybody knows, a really vitally important process for our brain to undergo. If you miss a day of sleep, and maybe thinking back to being in college, pulling an all-nighter, the next day we're a lot more irritable. We maybe are feeling a little bit more slow and sluggish. And this is actually a really interesting topic of study in the scientific community as well. So sleeping is really important for our brain to create memories and learn. So our brain goes through processes overnight while we sleep that basically consolidates the memory that we learned throughout the day. So it'll actually reactivate a lot of the memories that we've had throughout the day in order for us to then consolidate and better hold on to that information. And like I mentioned, we have a lot of these kind of anecdotal evidence for when we've kind of missed some sleep and then had to function the next day. But studies have also shown that lack of sleep can impair our ability to regulate our emotions, learn effectively, and perform things like motor skills and cognitive skills that are needed for functioning throughout the day. So here I've included some data from a study where they looked at emotional regulation. So they used a task where you're basically looking at your reappraisal abilities during emotionally stimulating tasks. And then they looked at self-reported sleep quality over the week prior to, or the week during that testing. And you can see here that there is a significant relationship with the reappraisal ability. The way that it's scored, basically, the way that this task is set up is that this positive relationship means that people who have poorer sleep quality over the week have worse emotional regulation abilities. So there is a relationship with both emotion and, as I mentioned, things like memory, learning, and attention with lack of sleep. So just going back to the key points for today, as I mentioned, there are different macro and micronutrients that can benefit cognitive functioning, both at an acute scenario, so things like breakfast consumption, as well as a long-term scenario, so things like flavonoids, where they're protecting against cognitive decline. We also know that exercise is a really beneficial behavior for both healthy brain functioning as well as structure. And then, like I mentioned, sleep is going to impact our learning and memory abilities, cognitive performance, motor processes, and emotional regulation. And just here are some references. I included everything that we talked about today, as well as some additional references regarding the omega-3 DHA fatty acids, in case you are interested in learning some more. And with that, we can let you guys unmute and ask questions, or if you wanted to put some questions in the chat, I have that open for you guys to do that.
All right, Corinne gave us a lot of food for thought here, a lot of good information. So does anybody have any questions out there? Feel free to unmute yourself or type your question in the chat box.
And I'm happy to go back to any slides if you guys want to go back and kind of talk about anything in more in depth.
We will be sending out an evaluation of today's program by email. So if you get that in your email, would you please open the link? It's a quick couple questions, and there is a question to put in if you're coming to next session in 2 weeks. That is going to be on May 13th. The program will be on nutrition, wellness, and aging. So if you have any particular questions about that, you can submit a question ahead of time on that one. All right, we have some questions coming in.
Yes, it looks like the first question was about the difference between EPA and DHA. And so basically, EPA and DHA are two different types of omega-3 fatty acids. They are present in similar foods from what I know. So yes, you can find both of these in fish. And so I'm not sure too much like metabolically what the difference between them is in terms of like how our body processes them. But basically these are two facts that are studied highly in the realm of brain, because they're both important for cell membrane permeability and cell membrane fluidity. And so those are why they're studied a lot in brain science. But yeah, they're both omega-3 fatty acids, and they're found in a lot of different fish and shellfish. Let's see. I think the next question is from Alana. Most of the literature related to exercise and cognition is aerobic. Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think a lot of the research is primary in the aerobic literature or aerobic fitness realm. I know that there's some work at the U of I being done in the realms of like yoga and dance in relation to cognition, but I'm less familiar with how that's related to brain, specifically related to memory, because most of the literature surrounding memory is related to aerobic. I know there have been some studies looking at the difference between aerobic and resistance exercise, and they found that aerobic fitness is better for these questions regarding brain than resistance exercise. Not meaning to say that resistance is bad, just that most of the studies have been preferable to the aerobic fitness side. The next one is from Anya. She's asking if is the level or amount of exercise that adults should be getting dependent on age. I believe so. I'm not 100% sure, but I forgot to include some resources Kelsey and Chelsea had found from the Mayo Clinic, where they basically will go through different guidelines for exercise dependent on factors like age, BMI, normal activity levels prior to engaging in like an exercise regimen. But yes, that definitely does change with age. The previous sessions are available recordings wise and content wise on a website. So I think Chelsea can include that in the chat because I don't have that link accessible at the moment. Is a person laying down more memories during the dream state of sleep or not? Wondering if nights filled with dreams indicate deeper state of sleep. That's a great question. I'm not as familiar with the sleep literature as I'd like to be, just because it's not my primary field of focus. I'm not sure if dreams are indicative of better sleep or not. So that's a really great question, Kelly. I'd have to get back to you on that one. Kathy asked about you mentioned the attachment that had links. Oh, yes, that is the handout. So I think Chelsea included that a little bit earlier in the chat. Or if you get the emails, it'll be in an email. And it looks like she just included the link too. Are there any other questions? Okay, if there are not any other questions, then I think we are all set for today. It looks like Chelsea included the links for previous recordings as well as the handouts and the survey for today in the chat. So please fill out the survey. We are working on creating more content that will be available to you guys over more courses. And so we'd love to get your feedback as we start building kind of our guidelines for what's going to happen moving forward with some of the other content we're preparing for you guys.
All right, thank you everybody and have a great week. We hope to see you again on May 13th for Nutrition, Wellness, and Aging.